Hello, viewers. There's a lot of chess books out there that'll tell you all about pawn structure and endgames and tactics, but I'm hard-pressed to name any books that talk about a basic question, which is, when should I trade pieces? When should I not trade pieces? A lot of players under 2000 just don't seem to understand when to trade and when to avoid trades. So here's some things that I've picked up over the years. So the first factor to think about when considering to trade pieces or not is think about, how does this trade affect my ability to control key squares? So as one of our example games, we'll look at a game that I played against Fritz 8. Back in the late 2000s, computers were very uneven in their strengths. If you give them a complicated position, they could outcalculate a world champion. If you get a position more like this one that's based not so much on calculation but more about understanding, then they could make some fairly basic mistakes. So I was black and Fritz was playing white, and Fritz played knight e4. This move might look reasonable enough, but I actually think this is the losing move. Here's why. So after a couple of trades, take, rook e8, and then take, knight f5, white's left with a dark squared bishop, which means that white can't contest the light squares. So my knight in f5 over here is going to be just unopposed. So now I play h5 to take away the g4 square so I can't be kicked away. I can also fight for the e4 square later. I'm going to occupy my rook. Later on, I'm going to play queen a4. That's going to target the c4 pawn and also the a2 pawn. So those trades that might have looked like they're even trades actually left white very vulnerable on the light squares. So I'll show you a little bit of what happened next. So I prepare to take over the e file. So white's going to contest that. And now I mentioned I was going to queen a4, so now I'm hitting both those pawns. So white's forced to go passive with the rook, and the next thing I do is actually move my knight away from f5 because I'm going to take over e4, and now c4 is going to fall. And after c4 fell, a lot of white's other pawns were also vulnerable. f4 is vulnerable, d5 is vulnerable, a2 is still weak, and white went on to lose. My technique was not the most perfect, but still good enough to win this game. So everything just went downhill from white after that trade that weakened the light squares. So before you trade pieces, think about, how does this affect my ability to control key squares? I have another example where I beat a Grandmaster Strength computer that didn't know when to trade. That's saved in a different database, so let me pull that up. Here we go, this game. So I'm playing white, and the computer at the black pieces was Ruffian 1.0.1. This was a free engine at the time. So in a Sicilian Najdorf, the d5 square is a key square. White's trying to dominate it, black is trying to defend it. So I played f5 in order to dislodge d5 square's defender. Ruffian actually cooperated with me and helped me trade off light squared bishops. I think this actually is known in opening theory, but I don't recommend this for black. I think it's just bad. I was happy to get rid of the d5 square's defender. And now I try to trade off the f6 knight. The f6 knight's guarding d5. My dark squared bishop only controls dark squares. It doesn't control d5. So I'll get rid of a piece that can't control d5 in order to eliminate a piece that can contest that square. So black castle, and I traded off the bishop for the knight. And now I jumped into d5. And now I got some more help from my opponent. So knight e7 trades off the last piece that can fight for d5. So after I eliminated that knight, I could just dominate the light squares. c4 and d5 were all week, and I went on to win the game. I actually played rook fd1 here. I probably should have taken the knight immediately, but I got some more help, and now I just dominate the light squares, and life is very good for white. So before you trade pieces, think about control of key squares. A second thing to consider is the activity of the pieces. So, for example, I've seen positions like this many times. I used to play this as black quite a bit. So standard Sicilian time enough. And now a lot of people would play something like knight takes c6, a move that doesn't make much sense. So the knight on d4 is more active than the knight on c6. So you shouldn't be trading an active piece for a passive piece. What's even worse about this trade is that after pawn takes, my b pawn, which was previously not influencing the center at all, is now able to help me control d5. So don't trade active pieces for passive pieces. So here's another example. This is from round 1 of the 2016 US Open. So after a chaotic game, we reached this position. So I'm a pawn up, but black is so active here that actually black is just doing perfectly fine. So black played rook e4, keeping the rook active, and also even playing to infiltrate and do some damage. I fear black's rook on e4 is more active than my rook on d1, so I tried to offer a trade. So what black should have done, of course, is refuse, because if you have the more active rook, try to keep the rook on the board. Instead, my opponent traded rooks, and white went on to win. So maybe black was thinking that after bf2, I'd be forced to do something like knight g2 or something ugly like that, but I actually just moved knight d3, sacrificing the pawn because I can keep that bishop hemmed in. So another example of how bad things happen when you trade an active piece for a passive piece. Here's another example about trades in activity. This is from the 2016 US Open, 2016 Chicago Open. So I was playing one of the top seeds in the event, and I was very much not among the top seeds. So white was definitely hoping to win this game. Problem is, position is pretty equal, and there's not a whole lot white can do to create much play. Another important idea here. So don't trade or not trade based on ratings. Trade based on what's going on the board. So I figure white's rook on d1 is more active than my rook on c8, so let's trade off. So what white did is white gave up the open file by playing rook e1. So white made his rook more passive and gave my rook more activity, which was a step in the wrong direction. It's not lost yet for white by any means, but this started a slide that downward slide he could not reverse. So I also figured his bishop on c3 is better than my bishop on e7, so let's trade. He says no, though it does involve trading light square bishops. This push, though, does make his bishop bad because now his bishop has reduced its scope. So I just drop back. And what white should have done is probably just traded bishops on b7 and play queen g2, and it's all just equal and we're heading towards a draw. But like I said, white very much did not want to draw in this game. White insisted on trying to keep the game going, so white played king g2 instead. So now I activate my rook even further and play rook d3, putting some more pressure on this bishop over here. White really needs to just bail out now and play rook e3 and force out a bunch of trades, but white was still stubbornly avoiding trades and played bishop e4 instead to try to keep the rooks on the board. So now I just took it and played queen c6, and white's in this rather awkward pit over here. White played queen e2 to defend the rook, and I played queen d5, and now my pieces are much more active than white's. So white is avoiding a draw, but he's avoiding a draw by drifting into a losing position. So white steps out of the pin, and now I play c4 to cement my control over the center. And now by 5 wicks, I realize, okay, this is getting out of control here. I gotta trade some pieces. So he backs up, and now I activate my bishop and try to force him to trade on my terms. So force him to trade in a way that's favorable to me. If I just take anything with the rook, I think white can probably still defend this. But if I make him take this way, now I get this monster passed pawn on d3, and he was unable to cope with that. So white just tried to avoid trades at all costs, and what he ended up doing is letting me take over the game. So think about activity of the pieces before you trade. So this goes along with our third factor to consider, which is who should initiate the trade. If you thought about these other considerations and established, okay, a trade is all right for me, you still got to think about, should I even be making a trade, or should I force my opponent to make the trade? On whose terms are we trading? So in this example I just mentioned, if I just take an e3, it's nothing, but if I make him take in this way, if I make him initiate the trade, this is much more favorable because now I get this very strong passed pawn. Here's another example about who should be initiating the trade. So I am playing white here against the Play Magnus app. I figured that the trade of queens would be alright for me. That's because I am lagging in my development here. My bishop and rook have not gotten into the game, so I want to trade off the queens to try to reduce any of his activity so I don't have to worry about getting attacked. But the way I chose to trade queens was not very good. I just took the queen on c4, and that allowed pawn takes, and that brought his pawn closer to the center so I could support d5, d3 kind of stuff. Also opened up the b file for his rooks. So that was not the right way to trade queens. Instead, back here, I should have played queen d1, and then if we're going to trade queens, let's do it this way after queen c2. So the queen c2, queen takes, rook takes, I've not made that kind of big concession. Here's another example. So this is from the, I was playing white in the Cedar Rapids Leather Jackets Open back in 2017. So black just offered a queen trade. I can't really avoid it in a good way because if I avoid it, I just give him control of the d file, and that's no good. But I did think about who should be initiating this trade. Under what terms should we be trading? So instead of just taking on d7, which is probably just a draw, I played queen d6. So if we trade in this way, which is what happened in the game, now my bishop gets to hunt down his pawns on the dark squares. And he also has to worry about this guy over here. The pawn d6 is indeed weak, and he did end up running the pawn up, but while he is doing that, he is getting wiped out over here. So those are a few tips on when to trade and when not to trade. Be sure to tune in for our next episode, and I'll have some more tips for you.